David Foster Wallace, the great writer, once said, learning how to think really means learning how to exercise some control over how and what you think. It means being conscious and aware enough to choose what you pay attention to and to choose how you construct meaning from the experience. It's, in short, we teach how to think by showing our students what they can think about when they're reading and listening. We aren't just understanding words and their meaning. We're using language to understand humanity, being more empathetic and understanding of people. And make no mistake, this starts in the classroom. It starts through reading. So before I launch into this example that I have prepared for you guys, can I get a sense of what grades? Are you guys mostly elementary school? Can you maybe like type in the chat what grade level you teach?
Yeah, we have kindergarten
and kindergarten, nice.
Primary, yeah.
Primary.
Maybe up to maybe grade 4, something like that.
I admire people who work in kindergarten. It's a very different set of rules than than my experience in high school. You have to be very organized, very patient. I mean, I guess I do too, but it's a different kind. Cool. Donna, what subject do you teach in secondary? English or another subject? English. Cool. Has anybody ever taught a story, like a short story or a novel in English in their classes? You have, Priscilla. Cool. Any particular stories? And at what grade level? Shakespeare. Oh. Romeo and Juliet or another one, Donna? The gingerbread man's a good one. All right, I'm sending you a list of the terms we're going to be using. Then we're ready to get started. Princess Diana. All right, cool. Yeah, well, for Shakespeare in high school, I especially love Othello and Macbeth. It's cool to introduce themes of like race and gender through stories like that. All right. Cool. So I'm going to start with an example story that's more suited to primary school. Now, this is more the upper end of primary school, like probably 4th grade, 5th grade. It's called Louisa, Please Come Home by Shirley Jackson. You can read it on your own time. It is quite short. The print on the version I gave you is very big. Story is about a young girl who runs away from home. She gets a job. She reinvents herself. She's happy. Her mother speaks on the radio every year that she misses her and wants her daughter to come home. And then when she finally comes home at the end, her mother thinks it's a cruel joke and she doesn't recognize her. She thinks that Louisa is an imposter, that she's not really her daughter. It's a very strange and ironic moment in the story. And it's a really fun one to teach to this grade level because students usually have a lot of ideas about it. So in this example, we're going to go over using the story to teach certain content. This is called competency-based learning. We're not just trying to get students to memorize the plot of the story or someone's opinion about it. We're giving a specific framework. We have specific terms that we want the students to learn. And we want to use the story to have students to reflect on these deeper concepts that are related to the terms they are learning. So to keep it very simple for elementary school, I gave two basic terms on the handout. One is protagonist or antagonist, and one is conflict. With protagonist and antagonist, it's a very simple concept that we teach our students, right? Protagonist is the main character. Antagonist is it could be a character. It doesn't have to be. It can be any force, any culture. It's usually often the scarier antagonists are bigger than individual people. This is a good time to introduce that to students. And when we do, even before we read the text, we can ask students to come up with examples before. So you could ask a student, hey, LDR, you are the protagonist in your own life. Who was your biggest antagonist at home yesterday? Or what? Might say mom or dad, might say my baby brother. And then maybe he'll say homework. If he says homework, that's surprisingly a more sophisticated answer. Now the antagonist is no longer a person, it is a concept. And we get to explore the relationship between the person and the concept, and how the concept kind of threatens the person or challenges the person. That's probably the better word here. So once we know these terms, and you can open the list of vocabulary that I sent that should give you the definition that we would give these students. We can start with some basic questions. Once it's clear the students know the story, I'm sure you guys probably ask comprehension questions as you are reading. Oh, okay, what happened? That's fine. We should make sure the students know what happened in the story, but this is just the beginning. So questions like that would be, why does Louisa's mother not recognize her? That ends up being a bit of a deeper question as we go on. So the questions that I would recommend, if Louisa is the protagonist, who and what are the antagonists? At this point, I go back to the definition we gave, where antagonist isn't the, it's a. It's not the person or force that goes against the protagonist, it's a. What is the difference between the and a in this example?
Maybe it's the culture. I don't know. It's not the person. It's
if I say Sanjar, who is the antagonist in your life, versus Sanjar, who is an antagonist in your life, what is the difference between these questions? There's a very big one.
oh, it's open-ended. So it leaves you to decide.
I mean, they both kind of do. They both leave you to decide. It's A is general. Thank you, Priscilla. That's true. It's more that one is plural and one is singular. The protagonist tells students that there's one right answer. In literature, that can be a dangerous thing, because then we think about our interactions with other students, with teachers, right? What is the right thing to say? What is the right thing to do? The truth is there's many. And you might have a lot of antagonists each day. There might be people who antagonize you, but there might be situations at home or cultures that antagonize you. So we want to introduce the idea that there's more than one antagonist, and that's very important. So the obvious answer students might give is, oh, it's Louisa's family. They made her want to run away in the first place. They are antagonists. All right. But she runs away very early in the story, and it's not over. It's not resolved. So what or who are the bigger antagonists? Questions like this, they shouldn't be answered immediately. Students might get a couple minutes to think about it. They posit their answers, and we discuss them in a group. We try not to say words like no or wrong. When students give answers, we want to be as supportive of those answers as we can. Remember, we're teaching the humanities first. So if a student says an answer like life, the answer is, of course, quite useless. It's very vague. What do you mean about life? We follow up. Oh, that's interesting. What do you mean? What part of life is antagonizing Louisa? The goal is to get to a deeper answer, like her sense of independence. She doesn't feel that way at home. Her biggest antagonist is that she doesn't feel independent. It's the fact that she always feels dependent on something or someone in society. That's the biggest antagonist for her. It's not a person. It's not her mother. You can't blame her mother for that. We go to questions like conflict, external conflict. Students will give an easy answer. Oh, the conflict is between Louisa and her parents. And yes, that is an external conflict in this story. It's a good place to start, but we follow up with more questions, right? We ask students, okay, she runs away from her family very quickly. Again, who or what is she struggling with or against after? Now, the antagonist and conflict questions are related, right? Once you know who or what the antagonists are, you can define the conflict. In Romeo and Juliet, you can give very simple answers. I'm going to go with the text that Donna has used, where you can say the antagonist is their families for fighting, for creating this situation where it's impossible for them to just fall in love under normal circumstances. We can peel the onion back deeper, though, and talk about one antagonist might be it's Romeo's complete inability to know what love is. He gets rejected by a girl who didn't know him, and then 1 week later he talks about her like she makes the earth turn. Then 1 week later he's in love with Juliet. This guy is all about lust. And once we understand that, the conflicts become very different. With Romeo, it's about being able to follow his heart, and it's about having people pay attention to him. His biggest antagonist is not having attention. With Juliet's, it's her family telling her that she can't control her own body, and at the age of 13. It's her parents telling her, you have to get married, you have to have kids at the age of 13. And when I was 26, I was a grandmother. Think about that. It's frightening for kids to think about. That's why I'm glad that's a high school text. These questions are related to each other. So we want students to be able to extrapolate, all right, are some of the conflicts for Louisa internal? If so, what? Is it like the epic internal conflicts we all had when our alarm went off this morning? Do we get out of bed or not? Do we make it to school on time or not? There are a lot of internal conflicts we have. What is driving Louisa? What is conflicting her inside? And that also gets to the heart of another antagonist, if we can set up that discussion in class. The most important thing is asking questions that get our students to think and that aren't too hard, that give our students some kind of path to follow. Again, as educators, we want to show our students, this is what you choose to think about, and this is what meaning comes out of it. Do we have any questions so far?
Yeah, I guess it's a bit heavy. That's
Yeah.
it. We are like it's quite late.
Probably you're hours into this, right?
Yeah, we're like 5 hours into this. That's why we're like all like a
All
bit
right, yeah.
mushy.
I do
So,
understand.
yeah. Do you guys I mean we have a secondary language teachers, they can really relate and dive deeper, I think.
Multi-marriages, what do you mean? Is that the name of a text, or is that are you talking about, do we teach about polygamy in general? I assume it's the name of a text, right, Donna?
Interracial, you mean, or like?
I mean, we try not to teach marriages based on one culture, right? We try to teach connections based on love and other connections. Interracial marriage? Interracial marriage is a common theme in many cultures. So yeah, we try not to teach it like it's something weird or outside of the norm, especially in a country like Kazakhstan, right, where people have Korean heritage or Kazakh heritage or Russian. I had a student when I worked at Almaty International School for 3 years. I had a student of Israeli and Russian heritage and a little bit of Uzbek. And she didn't speak Kazakh language, and she was bullied by the Kazakh kids on her neighbor, like on the street that she grew up with. She wanted to play soccer with them. They would say, go back to Russia, when she wasn't even from Russia. So yeah, it's cool to bring in stories that talk about race and conflict and marriage. With Romeo and Juliet, you can definitely reimagine the gangs as different races or nationalities. There are movies that do just that. But we try not to teach interracial marriage as like a big thing, because we don't want students to think it's abnormal. There are so many interracial marriages in Kazakhstan and around the world. We don't want this to be like in '89 when Madonna was summoned to see the Pope for having a relationship with a Black guy in a church. We've come a long way since then. That should no longer be shocking. All right. Thank you for that question, though. I'm glad that you're asking questions. It's wonderful. Thank you for your engagement. I am grateful for that. After students have a basic understanding of the text, you want them to apply it in their real life. I'm sure as teachers, you've all been told about Bloom's taxonomy, higher order thinking. It gets really mired to terminology. And with higher order thinking, apply, analyze, create, evaluate. It's a language thing. So with apply, that's usually a good place to start with literature. We ask our students questions that make them understand Louisa more. And it's good if we do this even before we finished going over the conflicts and the antagonists, right? We ask students to relate. Do you ever feel like you're trapped and stuck? Okay, who or what makes you feel that way? We want to get the students to empathize, to put their own selves in the shoes of the character. Have you ever had a family that made you feel judged? Do you get compared to your siblings? Questions like this that are clearly connected to the story that happen in the story can help our students understand these characters a lot more. Donna, you asked a good question, asking the right questions. How do you elicit it in primary grades since they can't comprehend yet? I half agree with your question. You're right, there's a limit to the depth of higher order thinking that we can go for, but it doesn't mean they don't comprehend things. Primary school kids know what it feels like to be trapped. They know what it feels like to have expectations they can't live up to. They understand these conflicts on a level that is very basic. So to answer your question, we give them basic questions, right? With Romeo and Juliet, if you teach it in grade 11, yeah, you can talk about love versus lust. That's a concept that maybe a fourth grader or third grader hopefully can't handle. If you say to your fourth grade student, oh, you really love your friends, and they're like, no, I just lust after them, it's fine. That would be extremely frightening, and it would make me very worried about primary school.
Yeah. And
But on a more serious note,
yeah,
when we do this in primary school, we simplify the questions, right? It's still about empathy, even in first grade. But the sophistication of the questions must evolve, as well as the text, as we get older, if that makes sense. I hope that answer is satisfactory. Just asking about conflict, say, oh, is it, I never want students of any grade level to say, oh, the antagonist is society. Because what the hell does that mean, right? It's so vague. What part of society? When the students will normalize thinking or speaking in abstractions, usually what finds out is that they don't really understand you and they don't know what they're talking about. That's the danger of abstractions. So we want specific answers, even if they're rather simple, right? She's running away from feeling judged. This might be a fourth grade answer for Louisa, please come home. Being judged, it is deeper concepts. And of course, in 10th grade, we can talk about with much more sophistication what that means. In fourth grade, it's still accessible if we simplify it. I do hope that helps. It's a wonderful question, and I'm really glad you asked it, because it is the purpose of this conversation. We have a lot of primary school teachers here, and I want this to feel useful for people.
So Adam,
all right. Yeah.
Instead of saying like agonist, antagonist, I mean, obviously, like in grade 1 or grade 2, you could you just say good guy and bad guy? And like,
I think that's, in high school, the answer is definitely no, because you get films like Joker, right, where the protagonist is a killer. And it wasn't just the Joker that created that, right? We have TV series like Dexter. You're rooting for a serial killer who kills not for justice, but literally because he enjoys it. And he's the protagonist. In Breaking Bad, you have a chemistry teacher turned meth cooker, sorry. And again, we're supposed to root for these characters, and we do. That's the beauty of Bryan Cranston's acting, right? You asked about first grade. I still think it's dangerous to say yes to that, because we don't want to oversimplify the world where it becomes a misunderstanding. If you think of everything in your life as a good thing or a bad thing, or every person as a good person or a bad person, that if you don't have that nuance, you're going to fail at empathy. Imagine what happens. Imagine the issues that come up for a kid when they say, oh, my father was my antagonist. He must be a bad man. We really don't want to open that can of worms. Same thing with classmates, right? So thank you for that question, right? And yeah, protagonist is a mouthful. We can teach that concept in first grade. I've seen it done before. In fact, I learned it around that time. And look how I turned out. Oh, perhaps a bad example, but yeah. It's important to simplify the concepts to make them accessible for kids, but not oversimplify them to the point where they become judgmental and they lose their ability to be understanding of other people. That's where the line is. There's a very clear line here. And when we simplify and when we don't. So the questions where students have a parallel, right? If students are going to apply what they learn, I'll throw it to you. I'll throw it to you, teachers. What are some questions we can ask the students to apply from this story? It's about a girl who runs away, who needs to be independent, who's tired of being looked down on by her parents and sisters, or at least that's how she feels. What might be a good question to ask to have the students apply it to their own lives?
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind would be to ask them, why do you think she ran away? And I mean, that would be more like just trying to understand the motifs.
So yeah, we're starting with the comprehension of the story.
Yeah.
And we're building it to antagonist and conflict, right? What is the antagonist, and what is the exact conflict here, right? What is the nature of this struggle? Shirley's antagonist isn't really her family. Not Shirley, sorry. Shirley's the author of the story. It's Jackson. Louisa is the protagonist. Her family is not really the antagonist. It's a very oversimplified and dangerous way of seeing the story. So, Sandra, that's a great answer, and it's a great start. We focus on identifying these things first, then we can ask about them. Yeah. So, Donna, who is the antagonist? Or who are the antagonists, right? Plural. Not just one, right? Yeah. Maybe her family makes her feel antagonized, but it's also this feeling of being dependent and trapped. So yeah, what are can also be a good one here. What are the antagonists? Thank you. And what is freedom? Okay, it might even be a better question of, students, what freedoms do you want in your life? What freedoms do you think are important for you growing up? And then it becomes an earnest forum of ideas for our kids, right? What freedoms do you think are important and why? We follow up with those whys. Again, in second grade, you're not going to get the deepest answers, but at least they're thinking about it. And at least we can clear some misinterpretations they have. The bad guy thing is the greatest example of that, right? My father is my bad guy. He must be destroyed. And somewhere in his grave, Sigmund Freud is thinking, I warned you. Freedom of speech. Oh, I love the debate teacher in me loves that, Donna, because freedom of speech. There's one format of debate where we have a value that you have to defend, and freedom is what a lot of kids spout off. And I always say, freedom to do what? And then they're like, I can't defend any freedom in this debate. I'm like, exactly. Freedom is a cool concept. It's a dangerous thing to argue. Because freedom to do what, right? But yeah, there is some freedoms that Louisa needs, right? So even in fourth grade, you can ask students questions like this, right? What freedoms are important for a young girl? That's okay to ask an elementary school student, right? What freedoms do you want? What freedoms might be dangerous? Why do we not encourage all girls to run away from home, especially in a place like Almaty, right? I worked at a university. I taught public speaking, and I had a student write a speech about her best friend, who at the age of 19 was kidnapped on the corner of Satpayev and Baitersanov. Not in a village, in Almaty, she was kidnapped. Her parents made her marry the guy. My friend had to go to her friend's wedding. She cried the whole time. Freedom, yeah, to do what, right? Which freedoms are important for us? Now, the bride kidnapping thing, not for fourth grade. That's going to frighten people. But what freedoms do we need in fourth grade? It's a great thing to get. It's a great question to ask our students, right? And these are things that Chat GPT and artificial intelligence, they don't cover if you're just talking about the story itself. AI, I wrote an article on LinkedIn, it's very short, about my fear that it enables a type of plagiarism, a shortcut, where students won't think. But it doesn't threaten the humanities classroom at all, as long as teachers can create the pathroom for students to think. And that's the most important thing. we talked about a versus the, and there's more than one right answer. There's more than one way to get your students to think. It's not just the questions that I ask. I'm a guide at most. I'm not the authority. I know we're running short on time, and you guys have been sitting here for hours, so I'm not going to go too deeply into the next part. The last part that I had prepared is there's a list of vocabulary called Aristotle's Golden Mean. Has anyone seen this before? I've done this in high school and middle school. And of course, in high school, the questions are much more sophisticated, right? Which traits on this will get you viral on TikTok? Those are the kinds of questions that you can ask in high school. Like, which types of traits in this make Odysseus in the Odyssey a typical romantic hero? Which traits expose ancient Greece as a sexist society? Then, like, those are high school questions, like eighth or ninth grade. But for primary school, it's a lot more simple, right? You guys teach English as a language first. I do get that. So Aristotle's Golden Mean is a good way to teach analysis to primary school kids through language. You're teaching them a bunch of new words that describe behavior, that describe character traits. Mean and nice, it's too simple, even for second graders. Come on. If that's where the second grade questions go, it's not where second grade should be. We can teach the words like the words on this chart. And students can give examples of what this behavior looks like in their life. Like, when have you been buffoonish? Once they learn what buffoonish means, they'll find that the answer is probably every day before the bell rings. If your students are anything like mine, like as in human. But these vocabulary words in the Golden Mean can be a great way to get in touch with the story, make meaning from this, right? So you ask students, which of the virtues, the things in the middle, does Louisa have as a character? How do those help her? This can be suitable for third grade. Now, the how does it help her answer might be a little bit more simple than it will be in 10th grade. That's fine. We're introducing that idea. Which vices make her run away? Which vices do you see here? And then students can actually start to criticize characters, even in primary school, based on this vocabulary, right? So our job as teachers is to give students the resources that we think will help them find meaning in the texts. And Jackson didn't talk about Aristotle. This is our connection, our creative concoction as teachers. We're using Aristotle to help the students understand character in Shirley Jackson. This is our creative choice. So teaching is an art. So I know I had to go quite quickly through all of this, and I know that you guys are very tired, and I'm very sorry if I've been hard to listen to for that reason. So I'll open the floor up. Any final questions?
Thank you for waking up at 5:30 in the morning and joining us. This is also quite a feat, and thank you so much. It's a Saturday morning for you too, so it's a day off.
It is. It gave me an excuse to have a more tame Friday night. Thank you.
So I guess really the challenge is there any way for us to raise this type of thinking, or like cultivate this type of thinking, higher order thinking, inquiry-based story reading in primary English teaching? Yeah.
I know some great textbooks that I had as a kid. I'm sure there are newer and better ones now too. There are many cool textbooks with anthologies of really short stories that are like 2 or 3 pages long. There was one series where there was one called Sudden Twists. There was one insert adjective. There was one that had the word conflict in instead of twists. And then students can read them very quickly. The textbooks have questions that help get into this, but the teachers also have a lot of room to create their questions, right? As a literature teacher, yeah, I want the students to like the book, but I don't really care that much at the end of the day, right? Romeo and Juliet, I'll use this as an example because Donna does teach that story. I love Shakespeare. He has 37 plays, and I freaking hate that text. Romeo and Juliet is not one of his better texts. I find it to be a really frustrating text for a lot of reasons that I don't need to go into now. If you're curious, ask me some other time, and I'll be happy to answer. But if I have to teach it, which at AIS I did, that's what the other ninth grade teachers did, right? I found ways to make it accessible. I found ways to focus on skills that I thought the kids would need to understand people, right? The gangster mentality was definitely present in some of my students.
Mm.
I'm not saying they were actually gangsters. In some cases, the families were, but but there were cases where the students had these social cliques, right? And they couldn't be seen going to an activity with a student from another group, right? So there are always connections that we can bring, right? And the goal of literature and social studies as well, and history, although it's through a different lens, it's different skills, is how to teach people to be less judgmental, how to teach students to be better humans. It's the humanities for a reason. And if what students learn from my class is the plot of Frankenstein, I freaking failed as a teacher. You can read that on Spark Notes. You don't need me for that. The unit I taught on Frankenstein last year was about coping, defense mechanisms in grade 11. How do you use intellectualization to handle grief in a toxic way? Victor Frankenstein's a great example. You literally try to beat death because you can't grieve for your mother. How do you intellectualize in a healthy way? Well, the monster, you learn a language to understand what people are saying about you. These are different ways of dealing with grief. One is really productive, and it's something that the kids should learn from. Ironically, it's the monster. The other one is really pathetic, which is the parody of romanticism as a genre. Oh, I'm going to go walk in nature and avoid my problems. Okay. But a lot of the students do the equivalent. When they're stressed about assignments, they don't do them, right? They're not intellectualizing in the best way. So when I chose this theme for my unit on Frankenstein, what do the kids need? How to cope in a healthy way, and how to evaluate what healthy coping is versus what toxic coping is. Frankenstein's a great way to teach that. It's a lot of fun if you look at it through that lens. And as teachers, right, you're all brilliant. You all have ideas that you can use to find whichever text you want, right? Priscilla might read the same story as me and have a very different interest because she's a different person. And she knows her kids a lot better than I know her kids. And she might decide, you know, I want to focus on this theme and this conflict more because this is what I want my kids to learn from more. That's great. Priscilla, as a teacher, is making a professional choice and one of compassion. So as teachers, right, the question isn't how to copy what other teachers are doing, right? It's how to find your own text to use and find your own way of using those texts. To answer your question, lastly, Sanjar, we can recommend books. I feel like for the younger grades, you want an anthology of short stories, like the one I mentioned, like Sudden Twists would be good. But for 4th to 6th grade, you might want something that's actually like a short book.
Noted.
If TikTok is making all of our attention spans 5 seconds max, and the goldfish are if even goldfish are thinking, man, humans have no attention span, then we can at least do our best to add a somewhat coherent story to 4th to 6th grade to combat that.
Okay.
Um,
All right, guys. Adam, thank you so
Sorry.
much. We will stop here, I think. Otherwise, we'll keep going forever.
Yeah. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your ears. I hope I didn't bore you too much.
Well, this is good. We don't have enough of such discussions. We're all about just functional skills, but not the thinking skills. Yeah, unfortunately.
They are both important. And what's amazing here is that all of your teachers care so much about their students, and that's why they are here.
On
So
Saturday.
thank you all.
Yeah.
You're all my heroes, and I actually mean that. Have a wonderful day.